All right, so I'll go ahead and start with what we're doing is talking about and reflecting on the documentary Crip Camp while it's still fresh in our minds. I know I watched it a few days ago and also saw it at the True False Film Festival.
How's it going? Yeah, my name is Espoir Bingo, and I work at the Great Plains ADA Center. And so I actually first got into the ADA through a good friend of mine, the late Chuck Graham. I was working at a restaurant through college, and he was telling me about disability law and all the different things that he thought it would offer me as a person, just learning about a new aspect of life and architectural accessibility and just a different type of civil rights. And so I decided to join the organization, and ever since it's really opened my eyes to a lot of things that's been going on for the past, I would say, even in recent years. We've made a few strides, but we have quite a ways to go. And I think one thing I learned about from this movie was how it's important to stay committed and never give up for your cause, and understanding that making a change for social justice isn't easy, and that's something that takes a lot of effort and work and passion. So yeah, that's just kind of how I started with the ADA, and I've been fighting the good fight ever since, and it's been good. So that's kind of my background.
I'm Anna from the Great Plains ADA Center, and I've worked there for 8 years now. And my experience with disability started out as just through work, and I never really considered myself a person with a disability until a few years ago when the chronic pain condition that I deal with really became more impactful in my life, and I had to start thinking about accommodation more. And it definitely changed the way I thought about disability when it became more of a lived experience. I'll throw it to you, Matt.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Bolig. I as well work with the Great Plains ADA Center, and Anna's been around the ADA as long as I've been hurt. I've been hurt 8 years. I was hurt in a weightlifting accident in college. I played football for Ottawa University, and just had a freak deal one day. I'm actually coming up on my GIMP anniversary, which is July 18th, so that's coming right up. But yeah, 8 years. The documentary itself really hit home with me. At first, I didn't really know what to expect. Again, I'm new to, sorry, I didn't say this, but I'm new to the ADA side of things for working, but I've kind of lived the life of a person with a disability, which is pretty obvious because I'm a T11, T12 compression fracture that uses a manual wheelchair every day. So, I've lived it, but now being from the side of, you're on the side of working, I've kind of noticed that side of it and the political side too as well, which I wasn't aware of. I wasn't even aware of people with disabilities when I first got hurt, really. I had like one guy with a wheelchair in my hometown. So yeah, kind of a whole new world. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head though, as well. It's, I think this whole movement started with a little bit of passion. I think from the beginning, they really kind of knew they were getting sidelined, and then they put all that passion together and really kind of pushed it forward. So it's interesting to hear that you've joined because of passion. I was just kind of thrown into it, but yeah.
Yeah, that actually kind of goes nicely. My first note about the film, which is one of the first lines in the movie, is he says, "This camp changed the world," and nobody knows this story, and it's a really wonderful, great story about how this Camp Jened, summer camp for people with disabilities, kind of spawned a lot of what eventually led to the disability rights movement. And what struck me about that was that this wasn't a youth empowerment camp. It wasn't political activism. It was a camp designed to just let them be kids and a summer camp. And through that spawns this incredible movement that's changed the United States. And so it really struck me that, like, you know, this just goes to show what happens when we give youth opportunity. I think you just can't underestimate what kids do when they come together, just through their own passion, and just by having an opportunity to come together, kids created a movement. And I thought that was really cool, that this is an organic story.
Yeah, to add to that, Anna, yeah, I thought it was very interesting how this, you know, this little camp created this like ethos, this culture of activism and self-empowerment, which lasted within its members for decades. You know, like they stuck with it for quite a while, and you know, at the end, I feel like they achieved a lot of what they were going for. So it was really interesting to see how that story played out.
But I thought it was really cool when the campers called it this sort of like utopia, and I can relate to them just from, you know, joining the wheelchair basketball team, coming from a small town, not having like the connection with other people, or wheelies, whatever you want to call them, you know, and then going to somewhere you have like not like-minded people, but people like you, going through the same similar stuff that you're trying to like hide all the time, right? It was a sense of kind of home, and then also understanding, you know, that you don't have to hide these certain things that you basically kind of hide from everyone else in the world. So that was pretty cool to hear that from them, because I understood that. But like, you know, having that community really helped them, I believe, push the revolution along, and, you know, change the world, you know, not just the United States.
You can definitely tell that camp was a venue for them to just kind of speak freely of things that they feel like they can't express themselves in you know, general society, or just, you know, in the whenever they're at school or just at home and such. So yeah, definitely an impactful place for them, I think. And it's just crazy how just one place started something that just lasted for so long. So
I have a question for you guys. I don't know what you guys think about the similarities of like the times then versus the times now. You know, the civil rights movement was going on a couple years or a couple decades, a little bit before this camp, you know. But how do you think it relates kind of to now, and how everything's kind of built up? Because I think it's very similar. Because I see it in the ADA and the movement, and just with like the 30 years and how everything's timing up. A lot of people here in just Kansas City, where I'm at, are really pushing for their rights and having and making change right now, you know.
I wrote down a note about this too, that I think in some ways they had different hurdles back then. So I don't want to say it was easier or harder. It was about being seen in the first place and letting people know it. There are a lot of people with disabilities. You don't know that because you don't see them, because we're sequestered off so quickly. And so the initial push was just getting out there and being seen to fight for your rights. We're in a challenging position now where so much of it is a fight for enforcement, which it isn't sexy. It isn't. You don't have your list of demands. We don't cheer when a law is passed. It's kind of intangible, and it affects people on a much more personal level. So it's really hard to see if it's happening or not. And so I think that's our modern day challenge, is being able to still go out there and demonstrate and be loud and proud and have a sense of community when we're fighting for enforcement of the ADA.
Yeah, I agree, and I think for our generation and future generation, enforcing the ADA statutes is something that we really need to emphasize. I deal with a lot of TAs every day, and I mean, everyone knows what the issue is, everyone knows what the solution is, but it's actually getting the job done and having someone be there and say, hey, this is what needs to be done, and this needs to be done right now, and this is how it needs to be done, and some accountability. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, I guess I just see kind of I agree with both the way you're saying. I guess the similarities I see is just the youth feeling empowered and really pushing the narrative. So,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as, we're in a political climate right now where there's been more demonstration of all kinds of civil rights topics.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're starting to see increased engagement from young people, which is really exciting because I think, it's always good to bring the freshest eyes we can, because so many times, I mean, even, here we are like in around 30, and already I can tell that like my thoughts and opinions have been influenced by my lived experience enough, and there might be ideas that I'm missing, and I really like having younger people come out and look at it fresh and challenge us to like, well, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we doing this? I'll catch myself going, I don't have an answer for you. That's a great idea. Let's push for more.
So what was your favorite part though, Espoir? This documentary, man?
I thought it was kind of cool how so when they're doing the sit-ins and they're demonstrating and they're locked into that office for a few days.
Oh yeah, just a few. It was like 30, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, it was a while, and I like
a couple.
How the Black Panthers was the organization that came and actually fed them and like gave them food. Like
that is cool.
It's ironic how it's all just one melting pot, and everyone's fighting a good fight. So it's good to see. That was very interesting.
Yeah, no, I thought that was super cool, and it kind of touched on a point that I wrote down that I feel, and it's like the hidden minority. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but like it's having a disability, it's not hidden to the eye. But back in the day, if it wasn't for the ADA, I mean, these people were like in the basement, and Judy talked about that, like how she was in the basement and, they were allowed to go see the kids down there, and the normal kids upstairs. I thought that was very interesting. And it hit home, just kind of feeling that, everybody stares at you, and everybody asks you questions and everybody kind of shies away. And I don't know if that relates to skin color or anything like that, but yeah, it was super cool to see those two minority groups come together and really push for it.
Yeah.
We see the most impact when we're looking at civil rights as a universal problem and coming together as minority groups, all facing the same challenges or the same types of challenges, that it's so far beyond a disability issue, are there curb ramps issue, and really more of we respecting one another and creating a world where we can, all really truly participate. Judy said something toward the end of the movie that like really struck me as powerful, when she's even like choking up and she's saying, I'm so tired of being grateful for accessible bathrooms. And if I'm supposed to be like grateful for accessible bathrooms in public, how am I ever supposed to be, I forget exactly what she says, but I think like an equal member of society. And that really struck me as like, yeah, exactly. That we shouldn't expect people to be thankful that we're meeting their most basic civil rights needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me think too about, and Matt, maybe you can speak to this because you work with adaptive sports. It made me think about how I think one of our modern day challenges is when I hear people talk about like youth adaptive sports and, recreational opportunities for kids with disabilities, I still hear this undertone of like, isn't that so good of you? Isn't that so like kind, giving these kids this opportunity? And I think it's kind of belittling. And I sit here as a parent, I'm thinking the right to play and the right to be active and to have recreation, I think is an essential civil right of every American child. I think if you don't have that, you're not having a childhood.
It's interesting coaching the kids, and being around them, because like they see me as and our organization is everything is kind of the same way Judy saw it, as like, oh my gosh, they actually have something. Because we just started this program like 2 years ago and we're already up to like 25 kiddos. And what I see most of the time working with them, besides just, because it's life-changing for the whole family. It's not just the kiddo, but the numbers of kids that go into college, not just for the sports, but just because they went through a high school program and they have a better experience at high school and then take that experience to college and so on and so forth in the job force. But where I see it is like,
where did that come
from? Speaking of kiddos, what's up, buddy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, James.
It's kind of weird because they're kind of grouped up as kind of like in the same category. If you have a disability, whether it's physical or intellectual, you're kind of grouped in the same group, and that's fine. Neither one is better than the other or worse, right? But it's just I wish we could break that mold where we weren't just kind of seen as, oh, good for you. And I even seen it a couple times just in city meetings, where the city itself isn't in tune with the types of disabilities and the differences. For instance, when they're building an adaptive wheelchair softball field for us, they're putting turf down and putting mats down and lights and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, if you think about it, how does a wheelchair roll on carpet? Well, it's not going to roll very good on turf either. And the same thing as a mat. So it's just, cities and municipalities not understanding. And then that kind of bleeds out into community because those are community leaders. But the kiddos, as soon as they get into adaptive sports, they're kind of blinded to that. And, they just keep pushing forward, to have a better life, and achieve what they can actually achieve. I hope that answered your question. I kind of bounced around there. Sorry.
That's super interesting. What you were saying too about, putting down turf and stuff, and like, that's not going to work really well. And anyone in a chair would know that. Reminds me of, a phrase that we hear so often working in disability rights is nothing about us without us. And I think that's, we can't drive that home enough. Like, the best way to create a more accessible world is to include people with disabilities.
Exactly.
From the very beginning of the process.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I found really interesting in this movie is how it really teaches people to be open and how to listen. The way that these campers were communicating with each other, it was just, just take your time, and like nobody was being rushed. And I mean, it was just very exemplary of how I think we should all treat each other in general, but specifically people with disabilities. It's just, make sure you keep an open mind and just listen to what they're saying and, try to better understand it, I believe, versus kind of rushing into conclusions, which I think a lot of people tend to do sometimes, so.
I thought it was cool that everyone had a voice. It was, I don't know if this is the moment you were talking about, Anna, where they were all circled up. And I can't remember the young girl's name, with, I believe, cerebral palsy, but she wasn't mute, but she couldn't really pronunciate her words correctly, or where somebody could maybe understand her really easy. But they allowed her to talk, and heard her, for what she had to say, instead of kind of maybe bypassing. And what's crazy is she's a pioneer, man. She's a pioneer because she's one of the people before they had the communication devices that now we have because of the ADA and what they kind of push for. It'd be crazy to hear what kind of personality and voice she would have had with, she had a device like that. And then, it could have changed her life. Obviously, I know it would have. I mean, it's not what if, it definitely would have. It's amazing that they were that open-minded and we're so narrow-minded, but yet we benefit from technology now.
Yeah, I think we're all thinking of the same scene here, where there's a part where the kids are all talking to each other about their experience with their parents and things like this. I believe the girl's name is Nancy, and she's struggling to get all of the words out, and I was just really, I don't know, I felt like proud of these kids for how they were also like patient and respectful, and you could tell it was really genuine, that they really did, care about each other. They wanted to give her voice. And I think of, how many adults I know who would still be incredibly uncomfortable in a situation like that, and just wanted to, I don't know what she's saying, I'm not going to know what she's saying, and I just want to get out of here.
Exactly.
My friends are even like that, like not friends now, but like old friends,
Mm-hmm. And I think as adults, we try to avoid uncomfortable situations a lot more. And I think it's powerful and really interesting to see, like, you know, these kids do it just fine. They're a lot more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Exactly.
But yeah, I was just really impressed and thinking, you know, we should all model ourselves after these kids.
Yeah, that was a perfect example, I think, as well.
I touched on one of the points you had earlier, Anna. I thought it was kind of funny. Is I had similar experience to like somebody kind of just assuming, you know, and one of them was like, my biggest pet peeve is like, I'll meet somebody at a, you know, restaurant or wherever. And I do this to other people too, but it's funny when they're like, oh, do you know so-and-so who's in a chair? And it's like, I mean, no, well, they're from West Virginia. And it's just like, well, I've been to West Virginia once, but I mean, I guess if we're in a wheelchair, we know each other.
Yeah, that reminds me of a little anecdote. We were a conference, I believe this was in Texas, you know, obviously a lot of chair users at a disability conference.
Yeah, couple.
Someone wanted to use the pool, and there was a lift. It was a weird setup where you have to go through the main elevator then to get to the lift, and it was locked. And so they came to the front desk, and one of the employees asked, like, well, don't you have the key? And there was a lot yeah, and we finally realized that she thought that every person with a disability just had a key to work every lift. I would definitely recommend that everybody watch this movie. I think it's a good time, which is the most important thing. It's telling a really important story in a really fun way, and I think that's something I've come to learn is, you know, there are always going to be outliers, but as a group, people with disabilities are funny. It's a really humorous, good time kind of group, and I think that's, you know, probably comes out of necessity, out of having to be adaptable and just kind of, you know, go with the flow. You never know what life's going to throw at you, and so.
And they're strong-willed as well. That's something I have noticed for sure. I mean,
yeah, it was like one of the first lines Jimmy's dad told him, you know, you got to be outgoing. You got to put yourself out there. And, you know, I think that's why the documentary is so funny and so cool, is because they're not hiding behind an ego or whatever. They have to put themselves out there feet first to succeed, you know, and obviously they did that from the get. But
yeah.
No, it was a super cool documentary. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Everyone should watch it at least once.
All right, guys. Good talk. We'll try to do this again time in the next week. And until then, we'll see you guys.
Is your hubby gonna be editing or?
Yep.
All right, so I'm not gonna lie, I did really poorly. Like,
we've never done it, bro. We're not professional.